They weren't chasing danger, they were chasing likes. One reckless decision for views, one ignored warning for followers, and the camera kept rolling. These are the most stupid deaths of influencers, where followers came first and survival didn't. It was September 22, 2018, in Warsaw, Poland. The rented event hall sat between warehouses, quiet except for folding chairs and a low hum from lighting rigs. Nothing about the afternoon suggested emergency, only a scheduled spectacle built on endurance, bravado, and the assumption that pain could be controlled. Marek Nowak was 33, a personal trainer who never fully escaped the accusation that his online strength content was staged. He worked mornings at a neighborhood gym, training office workers and retirees, then spent evenings filming short clips meant to look raw and dominant. His following was modest, but vocal, and criticism followed him closely. Comments accusing him of fake lifts and soft edits gnawed at him. He was methodical, sensitive to perception, and increasingly willing to escalate risk to prove himself. The slapping contest offered exactly that. It was promoted through fringe fitness forums and local live stream pages, not a sanctioned sport. There were no governing bodies, no medical staff, no mandatory health checks. Participants stood still and absorbed open-hand strikes from opponents, rotating turns until someone quit or collapsed. Marek trained grip strength and neck flexion, believing muscles could compensate for force. His opponent that day was heavier, taller, and experienced in similar events. The event was held live, streamed to a small but engaged audience. Marek arrived early, signed a waiver he barely read, and declined a suggested rest break. There were no helmets, mouth guards, or neurologic screenings. A few spectators joked about knockouts. No one discussed brain injury. The organizers focused on camera angles and lighting, adjusting microphones to capture the sound of impact. By the third round, Marek's face was flushed and swollen. He smiled stiffly at the camera between strikes, shaking out his arms. The opponent's stance widened, shoulders loose, palm chalked. A volunteer counted down. The hall was silent except for the hum of the stream. Marek fixed his gaze forward, jaw set, feet planted, hands behind his back as required. The slap landed on the left side of his jaw with a sharp crack that echoed. His head snapped sideways, then rebounded backward. For a moment, he remained standing, eyes unfocused. He blinked twice, attempted to grin, and took a half step forward. Then his knees buckled. He fell face first onto the stage, striking his forehead against the floor. Audience members rushed in as the stream continued. Marek began to seize, arms rigid, jaw clenched. Foam tinged with blood appeared at his lips. A staff member called emergency services within seconds. There was confusion about stopping the broadcast. Another volunteer tried to roll him onto his side but stopped when his breathing became irregular. Paramedics arrived approximately 9 minutes later. Marek was unconscious, pupils unequal, pulse rapid but weakening. He vomited during transport and then went still. En route to the hospital, he suffered cardiac arrest. Resuscitation attempts continued until arrival but were unsuccessful. The autopsy later showed an acute subdural hematoma. In simple terms, the slap caused his brain to rotate inside his skull, tearing small veins. Blood pooled rapidly, increasing pressure. His brain swelled, cutting off vital functions. There were no skull fractures, no drugs, and no prior conditions that could have been saved with delayed treatment. His death was ruled accidental due to blunt force head trauma. The event organizer could not be reached for comment and stopped responding to messages. The hall terminated its lease weeks later. Marek's gym placed his unused training log in a drawer, where it remained untouched. Friends archived his channels quietly, leaving comment sections frozen, unanswered, and permanently disconnected from the man himself. It was November 11th, 2013, inside a small rented house on the outskirts of Brno, Czech Republic. The living room had been cleared of furniture, lights clamped to shelves, and a camera fixed on a tripod. Nothing about the space suggested a performance venue. It was quiet, controlled, and familiar, which made the decision that followed easier to justify. Thomas Havel was 37 and ran a small magician channel online. His following was limited, mostly hobbyists and casual viewers, but they were vocal. He posted close-up tricks, endurance stunts, and explanations filmed at home. For years, sword swallowing had been his signature. He wasn't famous, but he was consistent, and consistency mattered to him. Lately, views had flattened. Comments began asking for something bigger, longer, more extreme. He read all of them. Thomas studied sword swallowing obsessively. He understood the mechanics. The blade must follow a straight path, guided by relaxed throat muscles, with the head and torso aligned. Any change in angle risks tearing soft tissue. Professionals train for years and still limit blade length. Thomas knew this. He also knew that escalation drove attention. Against his own better judgment, he bought a sword several inches longer and heavier than the one he normally used. The decision to attempt it at home was deliberate. He didn't want venue restrictions or witnesses who might stop him. He rehearsed alone, reading anatomy diagrams and watching old footage frame by frame. He practiced only twice with the new blade. Both times felt wrong. The balance was off. The weight pulled forward. He told himself that hesitation was fear, and fear was the problem his audience expected him to overcome. That evening, he set the camera rolling. He explained that this would be the biggest trick he had ever attempted. He adjusted his stance, checked framing, and positioned himself square to the lens. There was no medical equipment, no assistant, and no plan if something went wrong. The room was silent except for the camera's internal microphone. He raised the sword and began the insertion slowly. His jaw opened, throat muscles relaxed. The blade slid past the tongue and into the upper throat. Halfway down, the added weight caused it to drift slightly forward. Thomas felt it. Instead of withdrawing, he made the critical mistake. He straightened his neck to correct the look for the camera. That movement changed the internal angle. The tip punctured the wall of his esophagus and tore into a major blood vessel behind it. There was no immediate pain, just pressure. He completed the insertion, then pulled the sword out. Blood surged into his chest cavity almost instantly. He coughed hard, spraying blood onto the floor. His breathing became shallow and uneven. He staggered, dropped the sword, and collapsed beside the tripod. The camera captured him clutching his chest, then going still. A neighbor later reported hearing a loud crash and repeated coughing. Medical responders arrived within minutes. Thomas was unresponsive. There was no external wound to treat, only rapid internal blood loss. Attempts to revive him were unsuccessful. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The post-mortem report showed a torn esophagus and a ruptured descending artery. In simple terms, the sword created an internal hole that allowed blood to flood his chest, crushing his lungs and stopping circulation. Death occurred very quickly. Investigators reviewed the footage. There was no equipment failure, no outside interference. The death was ruled accidental, caused by a deliberate high-risk act performed without safeguards. His channel went silent. The video was never uploaded, but the final recording remained in evidence, a clear record of a single avoidable decision made for attention. It was June 7, 2014, in Malibu, California. Conditions that morning were stable but unforgiving. The waves were small yet fast, breaking cleanly over a shallow sandbar. The wind was steady. Visibility was clear. From shore, the water did not look dangerous, but the timing and depth left little margin for error. Erin Caldwell was 32, a lifestyle and fitness content creator with a modest regional following. Her online presence centered on beachwear, wellness routines, and polished leisure imagery. She was not widely recognized, and most of her income came from freelance consulting and appearance-based work rather than platform revenue. Her posts suggested ease and control, though producing them required careful staging and physical effort. Engagement had declined steadily, and she felt increasing pressure to create something visually distinctive. That pressure increased when a small beverage company proposed a collaboration at a surf facility. There was no written agreement and no payment, only product access and exposure through tagging. The concept emphasized controlled elegance in motion. Erin had surfed recreationally and understood basic board handling. Surfing requires constant foot adjustment, rapid balance corrections, and the ability to step off instantly. She understood these mechanics and chose to restrict them for the visual. The setup involved riding a clean wave while holding a glass of sparkling wine. To maintain the look, Erin attached high-heeled sandals directly to the board using industrial adhesive. The bond was tested for stability, not for release under force. Facility staff were not told a modified setup was being used. Friends filmed from the deck using phones and a handheld camera. The wave system operated on a fixed cycle. Waves were consistent but accelerated quickly once formed. Water depth above the concrete base was limited. Warning signage about shallow impact zones was visible throughout the facility. After several failed attempts, Erin showed signs of fatigue. Her paddling slowed, her legs tightened, and her arms trembled when she pushed up to stand. She declined a pause and repositioned herself for another run. On the next wave, she stood late. As the wave steepened, the board surged faster than anticipated. She attempted to adjust her stance, but her feet remained locked. The tail lifted unevenly. Her upper body pitched forward while the board's nose rebounded upward. The impact occurred instantly. The nose of the board struck her lower jaw, snapping her head backward. The force transferred through her neck, causing a catastrophic fracture high in the cervical spine. A sharp sound carried across the deck. The glass shattered across her face and chest. She lost muscle control before entering the water. The board continued forward and drifted away. Erin floated face down, motionless. Two nearby surfers reached her within seconds and rolled her onto her back. Her eyes were open but unfocused. There was no voluntary movement or muscle tone. Facility staff cleared the pool and began emergency response procedures. Medical responders arrived shortly after. Attempts to stimulate a response showed none. Her neck lacked normal resistance. Breathing became irregular and then stopped. During transport, she experienced a brief seizure and then lost all measurable responsiveness. Hospital examination confirmed a high cervical spine fracture. In simple terms, the injury disrupted the nerve pathways controlling breathing and movement. Water entered her lungs only after she had already lost consciousness. The cause of death was listed as fatal neck trauma, with secondary drowning. Toxicology screening showed no alcohol or drugs. The incident was captured by facility cameras and bystander recordings. The board and attached footwear were recovered, and review footage showed her feet failing to shift as the wave accelerated. The beverage brand removed related material within days. The facility later updated its safety rules to prohibit fixed footwear and handheld props, recording the death internally as a preventable incident caused by restricted movement in a high-speed environment. It was August 18, 2016, on Seven Star Mountain in China. Before sunrise, metal steps fixed to the slope were damp from night moisture, and the city below was still mostly dark. Wind moved through low cloud cover, and the mountain appeared calm with no obvious sign of immediate danger. Li Xiaoyu was 25 and divided her time between arranging flowers for wedding events and maintaining a small lifestyle account online. Her following was modest, under 5,000, built around muted colors, second-hand clothing, and slow, carefully framed mornings. She was organized, detail-focused, and sensitive to declining engagement. When growth stalled, she began seeking larger outdoor settings to refresh her content. The trip to the mountain was paid for with savings originally set aside for a small apartment deposit. She had no formal hiking experience, with most outings limited to maintained parks and tourist paths. Her gear was minimal: a compact camera, phone, and lightweight tripod. She wore flat ballet shoes chosen for appearance rather than traction, along with a thin dress that caught the wind. The route consisted of narrow steel steps bolted into the mountainside, exposed and intended for maintenance access. Warning signs at the base stated the route was closed. She read them and continued anyway. She started before dawn to avoid being stopped, pausing frequently to adjust framing. Higher up, wind increased and clouds reduced visibility. Seeking a cloud-filled backdrop, she stepped onto a slick, algae-covered side platform. She positioned the camera, confirmed the angle, and returned to the platform. She raised her arms, lifted her heels, and leaned slightly backward. A gust passed through the ridge opening, pressing the fabric of her dress against her legs. Her right foot lost traction on the slick metal. With no handhold within reach, her center of balance shifted behind her. Her lower back struck a stair rail with enough force to expel air from her lungs. Her head followed, hitting the edge of a step and splitting the scalp. She fell backward down multiple stair segments, striking metal repeatedly. The impacts caused fractures to several ribs and dislocated one shoulder. On the final fall, her neck bent sharply, resulting in a complete break at the base of the spine. Her body came to rest twisted on a mid-level landing. Her head rotated at an unnatural angle. Blood pooled beneath her hair and collected along the grooves in the step surface. Her phone continued recording after the fall. The audio captured sustained wind and intermittent metallic echoes. 2 hikers lower on the route reported hearing repeated impacts and seeing a shoe fall past them. They climbed upward and reached her position several minutes later, finding her unresponsive. Emergency services were contacted at 6:42 a.m. Rescue teams arrived nearly an hour later due to terrain difficulty and restricted access. No signs of life were observed upon arrival. The medical examination concluded that death occurred rapidly following the final impact. The cause was a severe head injury combined with a high cervical fracture that transected the spinal cord. Injury patterns were consistent with a backward fall from height, involving multiple impacts, with no evidence of prolonged survival after the spinal injury. Recovery of the body required a specialized technical rescue team due to the terrain and restricted access. Her phone was recovered near the final landing, still recording at the time of discovery. The footage captured wind noise and impact sounds before ending abruptly. Authorities confirmed the route had been clearly marked as closed and classified the death as an accident resulting from unauthorized access. No further action was taken. It was May 3, 2017, in a rural farming area outside Chiang Mai, Thailand. The morning was hot and quiet, the kind of heat that drives insects into motion. Fruit trees bordered an unused plot of land, their branches hanging low and heavy. Nothing about the place suggested danger, only familiarity and routine. Somchai Ratanakul was 34 and worked part-time repairing motorcycles while running a small online page dedicated to bees. He was not a professional beekeeper. His posts showed him letting bees crawl across his face, feeding them fruit, and talking calmly while insects clustered around his mouth and eyes. He called himself a bee master, insisting that bees could sense intention and would not sting someone who stayed relaxed. His following was small but loyal, drawn to the idea that fear was the real threat. Over time, Somchai's content escalated. Simple face-feeding clips stopped getting attention. He began climbing trees to collect wild honey, filming himself pulling chunks of the hive from branches without protective clothing. His friends said he believed smoke, suits, and tools were unnecessary if you respected the bees. He used sliced bananas and mangoes to attract them to his face for longer shots. He had no sponsors, no safety gear, and no training. That morning, he set up his phone at the base of a tall fruit tree, roughly 35 feet high, about the height of a 3-story building. A wild hive was visible near the upper branches. Below the tree, broken limbs and sharpened sticks from previous storms lay scattered in the grass. He climbed barefoot, carrying a small knife and a plastic container. He spoke to the camera about trust and balance as bees circled his head. As he reached the hive, he sliced into the comb. The disturbance triggered an immediate defensive response. Bees swarmed his face, ears, and neck. He tried to stay calm, continuing to talk as stings landed along his jaw and scalp. His breathing became uneven. His hands shook as more bees clustered around his eyes and mouth. Witnesses from a nearby field later said they heard shouting and saw him swatting at his face. He lost his footing on a slick branch and grabbed for balance, but his grip failed. He fell straight down through the lower branches, striking limbs on the way. His body dropped nearly 30 feet. He landed chest first onto a broken wooden stake angled upward from the ground. The sharpened end pierced through his abdomen and lower chest, pinning him in place. The impact forced the air from his lungs. Blood pooled rapidly beneath him. Bees continued to swarm as he convulsed briefly, then stopped moving. Farm workers called local emergency services. Responders arrived approximately 15 minutes later. Somchai showed no signs of life. The stake had caused massive internal bleeding, and the fall had broken multiple ribs and his pelvis. The post-mortem report listed the cause of death as penetrating abdominal trauma due to a fall from height, with multiple bee stings as a contributing factor. In simple terms, the stings caused panic, pain, and loss of balance, while the fall and impalement caused fatal organ damage. Toxicology found no alcohol or drugs, no allergy medication or protective equipment was present. His phone continued recording until the battery died. The footage showed the climb, the swarm, and the fall in a single unbroken shot. His family removed the videos later that day. Local officials warned residents about disturbing wild hives. The tree was cut down weeks later, leaving only a stump and a dark stain in the soil beneath it. It was December 29, 2015. In a quiet residential street in Santa Rosa, Laguna, the afternoon heat lingered after a cloudless day, and neighbors were already sorting fireworks for New Year's Eve. Phones were out, people laughed casually, and nothing about the moment suggested urgency or an ending only seconds away. Paulo Reyes was 21, a second-year information technology student who split his time between classes and running a small prank page on Facebook. The page never reached 5,000 followers, but it mattered to him. He tracked views, watched trends, and felt pressure every December when fireworks clips filled local feeds. Paulo was not known as reckless. Friends described him as talkative, competitive, and easily influenced by what gained attention online. He lived with his parents and younger sister and used small earnings from page promotions to pay for mobile data and editing tools. Fireworks were common in the neighborhood. Small firecrackers were sold openly from roadside stalls despite annual warnings. Paulo had handled them since childhood and believed he understood the risks. That afternoon, he and 3 friends filmed short prank clips in the street. The phones were handheld, with no tripods or protective equipment. The goal was to record something shocking enough to stand out before daylight faded. The idea came from a video circulating locally that week. Someone held a firecracker in their mouth like a cigarette and removed it just before it exploded. Paulo hesitated briefly. The firecracker was thin and sold as low grade. He planned to count down and pull it away early. One friend expressed concern. Another said it would be fast. No one physically intervened. Paulo placed the firecracker between his lips, holding it lightly with his teeth. The fuse burned shorter than expected, sparks visible even in daylight. He lifted his hand to signal a countdown. His fingers moved late. The fuse reached the casing before the firecracker cleared his mouth. The explosion was small, but concentrated. At that distance, it was destructive. His upper and lower jaws fractured instantly. Teeth shattered and were driven backward into his throat. The blast tore through the roof of his mouth and sent pressure into the skull. Blood sprayed outward as he collapsed backward onto the concrete, striking the ground and then lying still. One phone dropped and continued recording. Another captured his body twitch once, his chest lifting in a single involuntary attempt to breathe through a destroyed airway. There was no vocal sound. A friend shouted for help. A nearby resident ran from a house and contacted emergency responders. An ambulance arrived roughly 12 minutes later. Paulo had already gone into cardiac arrest before medical personnel reached him. Paramedics attempted resuscitation at the scene, but were unable to secure an airway due to the extent of facial destruction. He was transported to the local hospital and pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Police reviewed the footage to establish the sequence of events and confirmed there was no foul play. The post-mortem examination listed the cause of death as catastrophic craniofacial trauma with severe brain injury caused by an explosive device detonating inside the mouth. The report noted extensive fractures of the jaw, facial bones, and skull, along with fatal pressure damage to brain tissue. Death was assessed as nearly immediate. The street remained blocked for several hours during the investigation. Paulo's parents arrived after police notification, his mother collapsing near the blood-stained pavement. His prank page was removed within days. On New Year's Eve, barangay officials enforced a fireworks ban in the area, citing the incident during public announcements. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.